Emancipate yourself from mental slavery.
None but ourselves can free our minds. Welcome back to another Land of the Giants, where today we are actually going to talk about Franz Kafka's trial. Over to you.
So I am very excited to talk about this book, and it was a suggestion from my dad. Well, he suggested we do Kafka, and he also wanted oh dang it, the guy who wrote "Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep." Uh, anyway, now I'm rambling, but Philip K. Dick, he's great too. But and there's definite similarities between these two figures. But um, the trial is a book that I think is the best dystopia novel, and I think that it is not recognized for what it is, and I like it a lot better than 1984 and Brave New World, and I would like to put it in its proper place in this episode.
Excellent. Well, I will say that I agree with you with regards to it being right up there in the all-time great dystopian descriptions, let's say, right? I revisited it for this broadcast. I am definitely partial to 1984 because, as I have mentioned to you before in these broadcasts, that novel, perhaps from its sort of stylistic point of view and the fact that it really does read like a page turner. It is a bit like a kind of, there are elements to the way that it's structured that remind me of sort of John Grisham novel. You're sort of driven fast through it.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Well, yeah, the trial is certainly not a page turner kind of novel. But to
Right.
me that's almost where the horror of it comes in. Is that well, let me just briefly describe it. It is about a man who is accused of a crime and he doesn't know what the crime is, and the the judges or whoever they
Prosecutors.
yeah, the prosecutors, he is free to go about his day and continue with his regular job while he is on trial, and the story is where he just kind of goes back and forth from his job to the trial, and nothing that happens in the trial makes any clear sense. He never really learns what is going on at all, but he hears that the trial is going badly. And well, that's the premise. Maybe I'll spoil the ending for you later on in the episode, I guess.
And regards to ending, I mean, I think it is worth remembering that the trial was unfinished, and he wrote it, really pretty much right after or possibly during the same time as Metamorphoses, which actually was published, and I believe another number of other important kind of unfinished prose works were part of that period of his life, right? Which is worth remembering is the outbreak of the First World War. And one of the things that strikes me about the horror of the trial is precisely in some of the things I associate with kind of Dada poetry, kind of random, inexplicable conjunctures of bits of language that were never meant to be with each other in the first place. That sense of kind of surreal chaos.
Oh, okay, so remember we talked about Stephen King in another
Yeah.
episode, and he uses this technique a lot. So there was a sequence in Salem's Lot that I liked a lot that I've talked about before, where this man is being hypnotized by a vampire, and you, the reader, know that it's a vampire, but he does not know that this is a vampire. To him, this is just a mysterious other man who has appeared where he probably shouldn't be and is not explaining himself properly.
Mm-hmm.
uh, and the character is hypnotized by the vampire, and he starts just thinking about random nonsense of his day, and he forgets the person standing in front of him. And that is like what happens in the trial, because the main character of the trial moves from normal everyday things into this this uh this this place where his life is on the line. And it is like a but it is like a confusing hypnotic sequence of babbling when he goes in the trial.
No, that's an interesting, I think, comparison, because there are lots of sort of dreamlike features in much of what is happening to Kay throughout the trial's very disjointed, feels like, narrative. Um, One of the things that I also wanted to bring up was that I did not, and I did not particularly enjoy reading Huxley, Brave New World. I also wouldn't put up there with one of my favorite stylistic things. And I think, much with many of the books we've talked about in the past, it's a duh insight, but wow, style can really make a difference, right?
Yeah.
Um, so just by way of comparison, I wanted to say that my kind of sense of the trial from a sort of history of literature point of view is it's sort of the second in four steps that take us from Dostoevsky, Crime and Punishment, Notes from the Underground, through to the trial, through to Brave New World, and then 1984. And I think one of the things that's kind of interesting is that just historically, uh, when you're talking about sort of 1850s to say 1919, that period of time, European bureaucracy, courts, administrators, the sort of reach of rulers, whatever state version you were in, was in its formative period. And so, to whatever other extent, you had a great deal of actual kind of chaos, right? I mean, I think one of the things the trial really brings and is very impactful is precisely this sense that there's a machinery that is being operated without any clear rationale or framework or purpose, that nobody knows what the fuck's going on, but clearly something is going on, right? And there is this horror of not being, it's like the decentralized entity. You can't find the there, right?
Yeah, yes.
You know something's happening, but you don't know where the there is. And by the time you get into like Huxley, and then by 1984, which is what, in the 40s, you can see those works actually starting to reflect the fact that historically you've actually had both the development of the emergence of the state, the bureaucratic modern state, and enough shock events, right? Whether it's the Depression, which is Huxley's, mass unemployment, starvation, and then you have, the working out of the Soviet state, and Orwell's whole reaction to it. So as you move through those dystopias, it may seem like more superficially horrifying because of the very thing that makes them kind of less horrifying, precisely that you can identify who the fuck Big Brother is. And if you can
Yeah.
at least identify who to resist, you can resist. In Kafka's world, in Dostoevsky's world, like it's not even clear who and what and how you resist.
Well, I actually disagree with that
Mm-hmm.
about the trial specifically, and I say that the the trial is the perfect depiction of the slave mentality. And the main character is someone who he is allowed to go about his day and do his regular job, and he is obedient enough to return to his trial uh e- e- every time he's supposed to be there. And to me, that is the profound thing about the trial, is that this man cannot see that all he has to do is break through his training to escape.
Is just
And
not show up. Is just
it,
not show up. Right.
right.
Right. Is just not show up. Precisely. and the interesting thing about 1984 is that Winston tries to show up and simultaneously tries to run away, right? But the choice that he is presented with is nothing as clear as the trial, right? Because you're absolutely correct. It does demonstrate very much that if we can convince you that there's a policeman around every corner, you will behave as if there is a policeman around every corner, even if there's only one policeman and he's asleep on the sofa somewhere. So the idea that we internalize precisely the mechanisms of our own enslavement by following rules that we're not even certain who's making the rule and enforcing it, we're just showing up on the basis of that rule. Yeah, I completely agree with you. I wouldn't disagree with that at all. I just think that may be a further insight into precisely the insanity of the times, right? The premise of showing up for a war that's being construed as if it were a national football game, e.g. the First World War, right, showed absolutely the kind of mindless participation that needed to happen for people to just continually run into machine gun fire for years at a time. No? Yeah. And I think there is a kind of sort of socio-historical comment to be made that if the randomness and the chaos and the lack of clarity about where authority is coming from or what's happening in the trial is a reflection of sort of emerging bureaucracy, your point about Kay continues to just show up is how that bureaucracy came to have any capacity in the first place, right?
Exactly. So I want to talk about Stephen King some more because the Stephen King monsters have they don't have scary forms. They just have weird forms, and they use mind control more to confuse you than to
force you.
Like, right, exactly. Like the it monster does not literally have the ability to make you do anything, and the forms that it shows you are sort of confusing, and it doesn't feel like mind control, but you know that the character is in a world that's created by his mind, because he doesn't really see the monster, and that's the horror of it.
Yeah, that's interesting because it makes me think about how if you skip forward whatever it is, 40 years to 30 years to 1984, you can see that the apparatus of imposing mind control there's a much greater cost, right? You can see that Big Brother and the apparatus of the state has to make a much greater effort, right? To get their participants to participate. And of course, the same horrifying message at the end of 84 is, the idea that you come to love your oppressor, whereas the trial is really laying bare the mechanism that you have to participate in the trial for there to be a trial.
Yeah. That's why this book is so great.
No, I agree. And I think, again, revisiting it is, it's treacherous in the sense that it can support multiple types of interpretation, and yet not give any of those interpretations a definitive edge. So it really requires that an individual reader allow it to respond, to resonate, right? The way it's going to resonate with a reader at any given moment. Because I think, again, like many of these really great works, if you are privileged enough, if you have the education, time, and leisure, let alone inclination and patience, to read some of these things throughout your life, you find that the most treacherous and the most valuable of these works will present different questions to you at different points and ask you to make up your mind in fresh ways.
Yeah, I really think that the best way to provoke thought is to produce something that doesn't that is deliberately capable of having multiple interpretations.
Right, which makes for a feeling of discomfort. And, one of the things that has been sort of, in a kind of cliff high type of AI bot type of way, right? I mean, there's definitely been um, a song coming out of the Bitcoin space in the last sort of month, six weeks, which is recognizing the capacity to tolerate discomfort, okay, as a key part of participating in the space in whatever form you are participating, whether it is maximalist hodling or it is day trading, gambling, crypto.
Oh yeah.
And that this capacity to tolerate discomfort is part of the willingness to engage in independent thought or checking of your premises or self-administered dose of skepticism, which is very difficult to do on a micro moment-to-moment basis. No, you'd never do anything. But if kind of like sane investment strategy, check in with your portfolio once every month, every 3 months, but not once every 3 seconds,
Yeah.
subject your own thought process on a regular basis to kind of inspection, a period of discomfort, in order almost to buy those periods where you don't think about it and you kind of have all of your coordinates organized and so on, So those
Yeah,
that
it's a tough realization to understand that feeling rich doesn't necessarily mean anything,
Mhm.
uh because you don't you need to have the capacity to get what you want when you want. So you have to be skeptical of your own feelings, and or you'll be manipulated by the market. And yeah, the market is kind of like the it monster.
Very good, very good. I think the talking heads, of which we sort of participate, but I think also the other voices, the Greek chorus, the media, the whatever it is, whatever your source of information is that day, is also the monster. But
Right. Yes.
totally the monster. And I think the idea that you have to be aware of your own feelings in order to be able to see when those buttons are being pushed is ultimate enlightenment,
Yeah,
right?
and the character in the trial is not like that, because he kind of hypnotically goes about his day and does his job like there's nothing wrong, and then he's like, "Well, it's time to go back to the trial," and it's like, so let's talk about the ending of the trial now.
Mm-hmm.
So what happens at the end is, um, so one thing that I like about the bureaucrats in the trial is they never do anything to elicit a fight or flight response. So all of their babbling is sort of something that could make you feel calmer if you don't understand it, because it can just be kind of like a hypnotic induction kind of thing where you're just like, legalese ipso facto,
Oh my God, I gotta tell you,
e
I gotta
pluribus unum.
yeah, but I got to interrupt. I mean, so on the one hand, there's the kind of religious ritual of the Latin that nobody understood for 900 years, and you do this, and you get up, and you go here, and you do this, and you drink that, and you sit
Yeah.
down,
Oh my God.
right? Which is what the Christian experience was more or less for 1,500 years. But it also chillingly, as you're describing that, makes me think, what are we talking about? We're talking about 15 years later and industrialized killing in the form of the Holocaust. I mean, you have some of those exact same kind of elements at play, that if you kind of ritualize it, if you break it down into small pieces, if you make each of those small pieces kind of in no way threatening, you can totally march people off to their own death
Yeah. And so,
and get
but
them to
that's
participate in it.
and that's kind of like the it monster, I think, because the monster in it doesn't actually appear to be scary things all that much. It does silly things like the werewolf and MGM monsters, and then it does the silly clown character, and you know, it wouldn't be a Stephen King novel if the it monster turned into like, Thomas Jefferson, or somebody wearing a nice old outfit, who
Charlie
is
Chaplin.
very dignified looking. But
That's
that's but like the prosecutors in the trial, they're like people wearing suits, and they're very dignified, and they talk like they know what they're talking about, and you can just let them handle everything. So then at the very end, the main character is just led into a room where he is stabbed and he dies. So that is like the it monster too, because you don't get to see what's really eating people in it. This episode is turning into be more like it, more about
right,
it than the
right.
trial.
That's
But
more about it. But I
I
mean,
love I love it a lot, and I like the
I know,
trial a lot.
I know. But I think what you're saying is also kind of interesting from the point of view of the reader himself is therefore left totally dissatisfied. Another way of framing it is left to imagine and fill it in for themselves, right? To project, and that's why the trial can support so many interpretations, because the author doesn't give it to you at the end. And even if Kafka had finished the work, right, it's very unlikely that he would have then given you a big reveal, right, as to who and why. It's completely the opposite of 84. It doesn't have a like long manifesto from the entity that is actually knows what's happening with the trial, or why,
Right.
or who it is, or what its mission is. And again,
Well,
the
to me,
reader,
it makes sense that predators would not have a manifesto that you would just see to explain what they're up to.
right.
And the way we do things in the modern world is basically, I don't believe in the Illuminati. I think the information is basically out there. It's just that it's so boring and complicated that most people don't understand how it really works.
I think that's right. And I think, I mean, I've been riding a recent insight with regards to how much of a luxury both a whole cluster of kind of human rights are. Are they really only obvious to people when economic times are good enough to afford them? Along with what really goes into having the capacity to precisely, as you say, grasp what the average Illuminati is said to understand or know or whatever it is, right? And it's a combination of many things, some of which are really socioeconomic, right? That do not have to do with IQ or even a willingness to be uncomfortable, tolerate discomfort, and so on. And I think also that's worth pointing out, because one of the great inequalities that the world suffers all over, particularly increasingly the Western world, right, is that there's a great inequality not only in material well-being, but time and energy. So individual human beings command over their own time, their own space motion exercise, and the amount of energy they kind of retain the right to apply to whatever other kind of activity they have is really, really badly distributed as well. And this is a total tangent, but one of the things that, still to this day can kind of set me off spinning is this perception that somehow everybody living in the Middle Ages was in this horribly grinding, horrific time. And we're all so lucky to be living in this post-capitalist, industrialized alienation from our labor exercise. And, when we really dig into how medieval Europeans lived in terms of the number of hours per day, week, month, that they were putting towards self-sustainability and obligations to whatever part of a feeding chain they were in, along with the level of material well-being, you really start to realize that people were so much more free, and that one of the reasons why we have all of these cultural artifacts, whether they're poems or songs or buildings or art, is because people were doing those things because they had time to and the inclination towards. So it kind of goes to one of my pet peeves, which is how how much of a ultimately a destructive perception it is to see progress in the sort of myth of progress in a linear time way, as if, you know, previously and further back in time, just generally the less fill in the blank everything people were technologically advanced, mathematically literate, happy, you know, well fed, whatever kind of version of less in this framework, which says that not only is new always better, but even really has an idea of anything done now is by definition kind of new and better than what was done before. So that's my rant on several things. But back to the trial, right? One of the
Okay.
things.
Well, I just wanted to say confusion is the best way to induce hypnosis. Uh, so I am to understand. Not that I am an expert on hypnosis, but that's what I've read, and that's certainly what Stephen King seems to believe if you read his books, and that is kind of what the trial seems like it's about. It's almost like someone who has been hypnotized his whole life by this bureaucratic apparatus, so that he doesn't know how to just decide to walk away from it.
I think what's also interesting is, you know, the part where he comes back and I don't remember which character it is being beaten because of something that Kay was supposed to have done but didn't do, in fact. And there's a whole sequence in there where you see him, Kay, bringing to this kind of you know what, on the one hand it's the most real form because it's the bureaucratic state, because it's the court, because it's the trial, and bringing into that space a working kind of assumption of how things should therefore proceed, and being presented with the absolute kind of non-logic logic of the thing that he's actually just showed up to kind of submit to. It's
Oh,
yeah.
that's very much like a Stephen King book.
Poor Kafka, right? Like Stephen
Yeah,
King is Kafka. Uh,
yeah.
yeah. So,
That's just what a Stephen King monster would do.
and I think in terms of Brave New World, right? Did you want to say any words or anything about that? Because
Not really. I mean, I just didn't like Brave New World that much. Like to me, yeah, it seems kind of obvious. Like to me, it's kind of like you know, I don't know. It doesn't have the same impact with me that the trial does, and the same with 1984. Yeah, and I agree that 1984 is more interesting and more of a page turner, and it has more ideas in it. But to me, the the absolute control of the overarching state in 1984 is much less horrifying than the mind control state in the trial. And to me, like 1984 does not look like a place that is going to last forever, as they are telling people in the book. It looks like a place in crisis where everything is could fall apart at any moment.
right, that resistance is possible, and that
Yeah.
this one particular life, this one particular Winston, but there may be an army of Winstons, right? And so I think you're right. I mean, if you're kind of leading to a conclusion that says the thing that's so disquieting about the trial is that it presents a form of bureaucratic. I mean, to me, it reminds me of some of the kind of KYC AML crap that, you know, to be honest with you, people in Bermuda have been jumping through hoops for, like, you know, marionettes now for a few years with new layers of FACTA. I mean, to the point where pretty much every single person I know within a 50,000 person community has had to go into their banks like 4 and 5 and 6 times, you know, to say I'm running the same plumbing company I have been here in Bermuda for 3 generations. So you can see, you know, and interacting with some of the bureaucratic machinery that is responsible for a lot of this, you really do start to realize there's another type of decentralization, which is like nobody knows who the fuck is there answering the phone. You talk to one person, they have now work somewhere else. That and
Yeah.
like,
Okay. Well, wait. Have you
where's
must have
my
seen
all that?
Brazil, right? The Terry Gilliam film. Because
Right,
I can't believe I didn't bring that up before. But this
right,
the trial is kind of like it's a lot like Brazil. The only difference is that Brazil does kind of have like the veneer of an action movie, but ultimately the story is about a man who tries to interact with the bureaucracy, and he doesn't know what he's dealing with at all, and he continues to try to address the problem, as the jaws are clamping down on him.
exactly. And so I think that the point about Kafka's type of scenarios being those that can just endure and endure and endure, and that the form of resistance is non-participation, but that requires, that requires perhaps more than the type of resistance that would need to happen in 1984, which is, the banding together of a whole group of people.
Yeah.
I think it is more difficult to liberate your mind than it is to join forces with some other group of people who have done all the brain work, and they're just kind of, they want your energy, right? And I say that with no judgment. I don't mean, none of these, and I know you feel the same way. There's no, when we talk about this, there's no kind of association of like, well, bad you for not doing it. It's just simply recognizing that there's a great deal to be had from finding a way to have the time, energy, and inclination to do some of this kind of thinking or digging around for oneself.
Okay, well, I hope that you enjoy the trial when you read it, and join us next time for Land of the Giants.